Have you ever wondered why breaking a man's ego, instead of feeding it, can make him chase you forever? Not his heart, not his desires, not even his deepest fantasies. His ego, that fragile, invisible armor he's built to protect himself from the world. The answer isn't manipulation, games, or cruelty. It lies in something more uncomfortable, more unsettling, something that deconstructs everything we were taught about pleasing men and their need for constant validation. Because when a woman learns to break a man's ego strategically, she isn't becoming cruel. She's becoming psychologically aware. She's finding the hidden mechanism that drives masculine pursuit. And that kind of psychological understanding, that journey into the depths of male psychology, doesn't come with applause, likes, or external validation. It comes with wisdom, power, and a kind of insight most people still don't understand. No, she's not manipulative. She's strategic. She's not cruel. She's awakened. She just got tired of feeding egos that never reciprocated, of building up men who diminished her in return. There's something profoundly threatening about a woman who understands that a man's ego is both his greatest strength and his deepest vulnerability. Because that shatters the logic of traditional dating, dismantles the myth of unconditional female support, and reveals a brutal truth. Most men don't know what to do with a woman who refuses to be their emotional mirror. And it reveals an even more brutal truth. The men who chase hardest are often the ones whose ego has been carefully, intentionally disrupted. Carl Jung once said that everything we deny in ourselves becomes part of our shadow. And a man's ego? It's often the bright mask hiding his deepest insecurities. The ego is the persona, the face he shows the world. But beneath it lies the shadow, his fears of inadequacy, his terror of not being enough, his desperate need for validation disguised as confidence. They don't chase women who constantly affirm their ego. They chase women who challenge it, who force them to confront the gap between who they pretend to be and who they really are. They're less interested in easy validation and more drawn to the woman who sees through their performance, who refuses to play the role of adoring audience. And that makes men uncomfortable in the most intoxicating way. Because while most women offer immediate ego validation, the woman who breaks his ego operates on a different frequency. She operates on a level where nothing is freely given, where admiration must be earned, where his usual charm tactics simply don't work. And maybe that's why she becomes so irresistible, because she represents the one thing his ego cannot conquer, a woman who isn't impressed by his performance. But what many still don't understand is that behind her apparent indifference to his ego is a profound understanding of masculine psychology. She doesn't want just any man's attention. She wants the attention of a man who's been humbled enough to see her clearly. And until that happens, she remains unmoved by his ego displays. Maybe you don't get it right now. Maybe you think it's manipulation, cruelty, or playing games. But deep down, way deep down, there's a question inside you. What if the path to being truly desired isn't through building up his ego, but through strategically dismantling it? The ego that surrounds a man is not strength. It's a fortress. It's a structure he built not to protect his heart, but to hide his vulnerabilities from the world. Carl Jung taught us that the ego is the conscious mind's attempt to create a coherent sense of self. But in men, this ego often becomes inflated, disconnected from the deeper masculine essence. While most women try to inflate his ego further, thinking this will make him love them, the psychologically aware woman does the opposite. She deflates it strategically, forcing him to confront the real man beneath the performance. Her ability to break his ego didn't come from cruelty, but from understanding. She learned that men don't chase what they can easily possess. They chase what challenges their sense of self. This woman knows male psychology intimately. She's seen how men operate when their ego is constantly fed versus when it's strategically challenged. She's learned the difference between the man who's comfortable in his superiority and the man who's been humbled into authenticity. She didn't stop believing in connection. She just stopped accepting the shallow version of masculinity that most men present when their ego is unchallenged. What you're about to learn isn't cruelty, it's psychological strategy. And strategy requires understanding the mechanics of male psychology. She doesn't feed his ego with constant compliments. She offers genuine appreciation only when it's earned. She doesn't react to his bragging. She responds with quiet confidence that suggests she's unimpressed. When he tries to impress her with his achievements, she listens politely but doesn't shower him with the validation he expects. When he displays his status, she acknowledges it without being awed by it. The key is in the subtlety. She's not openly attacking his ego. She's simply refusing to be its primary source of fuel. And that refusal creates a psychological vacuum that he becomes desperate to fill. Because men are conditioned to expect female validation, and when it's withdrawn, they enter a state of cognitive dissonance. She's not rejecting him. She's rejecting the performance. And that forces him to dig deeper, to find the authentic man beneath the ego-driven presentation. This woman isn't playing hard to get. She's demonstrating that she's hard to impress. There's a vast difference between manipulative games and psychological awareness. Carl Jung understood that what we resist persists. And when a man's ego is gently but consistently resisted, it creates an obsession with winning that validation. She hears his stories of success without gasping in admiration. She sees his expensive car without commenting on his wealth. She watches his attempts to dominate conversations without being intimidated. And each time she fails to react as expected, she breaks his ego a little more. Not with aggression, but with indifference to his performance. The discomfort this creates isn't in what she says, it's in what she doesn't say. She's living proof that his usual tactics don't work on everyone. Men who are used to female validation become addicted to the challenge of earning it from the woman who withholds it. This isn't about being cruel. It's about understanding that pursuit is driven by the need to prove oneself to someone who seems unimpressed. She doesn't need to reject him outright. She simply needs to remain unmoved by his ego displays. And that unmoved quality becomes the most attractive thing about her. When she says she's not impressed, it's not an attack. It's honesty. When she doesn't laugh at his jokes designed to boost his ego, it's not coldness, it's authenticity. And that authenticity, that refusal to play the ego-feeding game, becomes his obsession. Carl Jung taught us about the anima, the unconscious feminine aspect within every man. And here's what most women don't understand. When you break his ego, you force him to confront his anima. The anima is not his ego. It's his soul. It's the part of him that seeks genuine connection, that craves authentic love, that wants to be seen beyond his achievements and status. But as long as women keep feeding his ego, he never needs to access his anima. He stays surface level, operating from performance rather than presence. When you break his ego, you're not destroying him. You're forcing him to find his deeper self. And that deeper self is what will chase you forever. The ego seeks conquest, but the anima seeks connection. The ego wants to possess, but the anima wants to merge. The ego is temporary, but the anima is eternal. This is why men become obsessed with women who break their ego, because these women force them to operate from their anima rather than their ego. She becomes the mirror that reflects not his superficial achievements, but his deeper potential. And that reflection becomes addictive, because it connects him to parts of himself he's forgotten. Jung called this process individuation, the journey toward wholeness. And sometimes that journey can only begin when the ego is broken enough to let the soul through. What you're witnessing when a man chases the woman who broke his ego isn't just attraction, it's shadow work. He's being forced to confront the parts of himself he's hidden behind his persona. Carl Jung taught that the shadow contains not just our repressed negative qualities, but also our untapped potential. When his ego is broken, a man must face his shadow. And in that shadow, he finds not just his insecurities, but his capacity for deeper love, authentic vulnerability, and genuine connection. The woman who breaks his ego becomes the catalyst for his shadow integration. She forces him to see that his ego-driven approach to relationships is ultimately empty. She doesn't accept his shallow presentations because she can sense the deeper man within. And that deeper man is what she's actually calling forth. This is why the chase becomes so intense. She's not just rejecting his ego, she's summoning his authentic self. And that authentic self recognizes her as the one who saw through his masks. The irony is profound. By breaking his ego, she becomes the woman who helps him find his true power. Not the artificial power of ego dominance, but the real power of authentic masculine presence. And when a man finds his authentic power through a woman's challenge, he doesn't just desire her, he needs her, because she becomes associated with his own self-discovery. Here's the paradox that most women miss. The strongest men are often the ones most affected by ego disruption, because strength and ego are not the same thing. A truly strong man can handle having his ego challenged because his strength doesn't depend on external validation. But many men mistake ego inflation for strength. When you break the ego of a man who's confused ego with strength, you're actually doing him a service. You're showing him the difference between performance and presence. The woman who can break a man's ego without breaking his spirit is operating from a level of psychological sophistication that most people never reach. She understands that you can challenge his ego while still respecting his essence. You can refuse to feed his pride while still acknowledging his worth. This is the art of ego disruption. It's not about destruction, it's about redirection. From shallow to deep, from performance to presence, from ego to soul. The men who chase hardest are often the ones who've never had their ego properly challenged. They're addicted to the validation fix, and when it's withdrawn, they experience psychological withdrawal. But the withdrawal isn't the end goal. It's the beginning. Because on the other side of ego death is ego transformation. Let's be specific about what ego disruption actually looks like in practice. It's not about being mean. It's about being psychologically strategic. When he brags about his achievements, instead of gasping in admiration, you say something like, "That's nice," and change the subject. You're not attacking his achievements. You're simply not feeding his ego with them. When he tries to impress you with his status, you acknowledge it without being impressed. "Oh, interesting," instead of "Wow, you're so successful." When he expects you to be intimidated by his confidence, you remain calm and centered. Your energy says, "I've seen confidence before, and this doesn't move me." The key is in your energy, not your words. You're not trying to hurt him. You're simply refusing to participate in his ego-feeding rituals. You respond to his authentic moments and remain neutral during his performance moments. This teaches him, subconsciously, that authenticity gets rewarded while performance gets ignored. Most importantly, you never explain what you're doing. You simply do it. Because the moment you explain, it becomes a game instead of a genuine response. The power is in the consistency. Every time he performs for validation and doesn't get it, his ego gets a little smaller. Every time he's authentic and receives your attention, his soul gets a little stronger. Asterisk, there's actual neuroscience behind why ego disruption creates obsessive pursuit. When a man's ego is challenged, his brain releases dopamine, the same chemical involved in addiction. The uncertainty of whether he can win your approval creates what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, the most powerful form of behavioral conditioning. Unlike the woman who constantly feeds his ego, giving him predictable validation hits, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability creates addiction. His brain starts craving the validation that you sometimes give but often withhold. This creates a psychological loop where he becomes increasingly focused on earning your approval. But here's the deeper truth. You're not just creating addiction to validation. You're creating addiction to the feeling of being seen authentically. Because when you break his ego, you're also the one who sees his real self. And that combination, challenge plus recognition, becomes neurologically irresistible. Carl Jung understood this intuitively. We're drawn to those who can see our shadow and still choose to stay. When you break his ego, you're showing him that you can see his flaws and still find him worthy of your attention. This creates what psychologists call trauma bonding, but in a healthy way. He associates you with both his greatest discomfort and his deepest healing. What you're embodying when you break a man's ego isn't the light feminine, it's the dark feminine. And the dark feminine is where real power lives. The light feminine nurtures, supports, and builds up. The dark feminine challenges, tests, and transforms. Both are necessary, but most women only access the light. Carl Jung wrote about the destructive aspect of the feminine archetype, not destructive in a harmful way, but destructive in a transformative way. Like a forest fire that clears the ground for new growth. When you break his ego, you're accessing your dark feminine power. You're saying, I will not feed your illusions. I will not enable your performance. I will not pretend to be impressed by your mask. This is terrifying to men because they're used to women who operate primarily from the light feminine. They expect nurturing, not challenge. They expect support, not transformation. But the dark feminine is what creates lasting attraction because it creates lasting change. When you nurture his ego, you enable his stagnation. When you challenge it, you force his evolution. The woman who can access both light and dark feminine is the woman who becomes unforgettable. She can comfort and challenge, support and transform, love and liberate. And men sense this power instinctively. They're drawn to it even when they don't understand it, because somewhere deep in their psyche, they know they need both aspects of the feminine to become whole. The goal of breaking his ego isn't to destroy him, it's to integrate him, to help him find the balance between healthy confidence and authentic vulnerability. When done correctly, ego disruption leads to ego integration. He learns to maintain his masculine strength while releasing his need for constant validation. The man who emerges from this process is fundamentally different. He's no longer driven by the need to prove himself because he's learned to simply be himself. And this is when the real relationship begins. Not with the ego-driven performer, but with the integrated man who's learned to love without needing to dominate. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation, becoming fully oneself. And sometimes that process requires the ego to be broken so the soul can emerge. The woman who understands this process becomes more than just a romantic partner. She becomes a catalyst for his psychological evolution. But here's the crucial point. You can only successfully break a man's ego if you've already integrated your own. You can't give what you don't have. This means doing your own shadow work, facing your own ego patterns, and learning to love from wholeness rather than need. When two integrated people come together, the relationship operates from a completely different frequency. It's not about ego validation. It's about soul recognition. What you're learning isn't just dating strategy. It's conscious relating. It's the art of loving someone into their highest potential. Most relationships operate from unconscious patterns. He performs, she validates. He dominates, she submits. He pursues, she retreats. But conscious relating disrupts these patterns. It says, I will not participate in your unconscious games. I will not enable your ego patterns. I will love your soul, not your persona. This is revolutionary because it transforms not just individual relationships, but the entire dynamic between masculine and feminine. The woman who can break a man's ego while holding space for his soul is practicing a form of love that most people never experience. She's saying, I love you enough to challenge you. I care about you enough to not enable your limitations. I see your potential, and I won't let you settle for less. This is the love that transforms. Not the love that accepts everything, but the love that calls forth greatness. And when a man experiences this kind of love, he doesn't just chase you, he becomes devoted to you, because you've shown him parts of himself he never knew existed. The woman who understands the psychology of ego disruption isn't playing games. She's awakening to her power. She's discovered that her feminine energy isn't just about nurturing and supporting. It's also about challenging and transforming. Deep down, men crave this kind of woman. Not the woman who makes them comfortable, but the woman who makes them better. Carl Jung said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there's a reaction, both are transformed. When you break his ego, you're creating the chemical reaction that transforms both of you. You're not just finding love, you're creating it. Not just receiving devotion, you're earning it. Not just being chosen, you're doing the choosing. This is what it means to be a conscious woman in relationship. Not a passive recipient of masculine energy, but an active participant in masculine evolution. So remember, his ego is not his essence. His performance is not his presence. His persona is not his soul. When you break his ego, you're not breaking him. You're breaking through to him. If this message resonated with something deep inside you, it's because you're ready to step into your power as a conscious woman. You're ready to stop feeding egos and start transforming souls. You're ready to love from strength, not weakness. If you found value in this psychological insight, share it with other women who are ready to understand the deeper dynamics of masculine psychology. Subscribe to this channel for more insights into the psychology of attraction and the art of conscious relating. Like this video if you're ready to break through the surface and touch the depths of authentic connection. Because when you understand the psychology of ego disruption, you don't just change your relationships, you change your life. The question isn't whether you're ready to break his ego. The question is, are you ready to break through to his soul?